We're reading through the Gospel of St. Mark during this Lenten season. We come to the 10th chapter today, 35th verses and following. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and he said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Some will say their mother put them up to it. That's possible. St. Matthew even suggests that she herself was the one who came asking that day. But I have a feeling that as St. Mark tells us here in chapter 10, it was rather a stripped down version of the story, that James and John were perfectly capable of voicing their request all on their own. You may remember that these two sons of Zebedee had been given a nickname by Jesus earlier in this gospel. He called them Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Sounds a little like a first century motorcycle or a motor chariot gang to me. Sons of thunder. Now, I know we don't customarily like to think of the disciples in such a negative way. We spent 2,000 years building them up, polishing their images as saints, naming churches and schools and hospitals after them. But the truth is, there are more than just a few rough edges on each of the men whom Jesus chose to carry on his work. And James and John, for all their other good traits, they had already demonstrated a bit of impatience with those who disagreed with them. Earlier on in this book, the inhabitants of one particular Samaritan village did not respond to Jesus and his disciples positively. So the sons of thunder rather imperiously asked the Lord, would you like us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them? Even a first-year seminarian could tell you that is not exactly the kind of caring, loving, pastoral response that preachers are supposed to have towards people. I've thought of it every once in a while, I'll have to admit, but I'd never say it. James and John were also, along with Peter, part of that inner circle of 3 disciples. Jesus spent extra time with them in his ministry. Some say it's because they were slow learners and they needed more time. I think they were kind of Jesus' favorites. It was those 3, for instance, and those 3 alone whom Jesus let go with him when he went into the house of a synagogue ruler named Jairus in Capernaum. And he raised that man's little daughter from the dead. It was that same King of Kings trio who were the only ones invited to go up with Jesus high on a mountain at the time of his transfiguration, when heaven itself opened up and there was pretty much euphoria everywhere. Everybody was blown away by the experience. Peter and James and John, they were the ones who were usually privy to the inner thoughts and experiences of the Master from early in his ministry down to the bitter end of it. So maybe it was only natural that, at least in the eyes of James and John, for the two of them to ask Jesus a rather loaded question one day as they traveled on the way from Judea down to Jericho and then up to Jerusalem for what was going to be the very last time. I'm certain James and John thought it was just a simple kind of request, if you please. Jesus, could you, would you make that, we want you, Jesus, to do something for us? I mean, I'll tell you, at that point, if I was Jesus, I would have said, excuse me. But Jesus just said, go on. Then they said, when you come into your kingdom, when you reach your glory, and I know hurry, mind you, but when you do, when the world is at your feet, Jesus, let's say that one of us sits at your right hand and the other at your left. You can see where the boys were coming from, can't you? They were on their way up to Jerusalem after a rather triumphant tour in the Galilee, where they had experienced great crowds of people. Jesus had performed brilliantly, dodging even difficult questions about divorce, blessing little children whose mothers thrust them into the Master's arms, even impressing a rich young ruler until he told him he had to go sell all he had and give it to the poor. There was that kind of downer moment when Jesus said when they got to Jerusalem that the Son of Man was going to be betrayed and even killed. But that was just preacher hyperbole, right? James and John, they were pretty convinced that when Jesus got to the capital city that he was going to use his power to establish a whole new world order. And once that happened, they'd already thought it out, at least to themselves. So they wondered aloud, won't you be needing some high-level help, Lord? Some fellows you can trust to be your consultants, your advisors? Wouldn't you like for one of us to say be your, I don't know, maybe prime minister? Other one be the head of your cabinet, chief of staff? So when you pass out the power and the privilege, and when you divvy out the duties, Lord, how about if you let me and my brother have a favored place? Jesus told them they didn't have a clue what they were asking for. Thinking ahead to what was waiting for him at Calvary, he warned them, you don't want to share my fate. You can't drink the cup of wrath that's waiting for me. But you know, the sons of thunder, they said they could. When the other disciples heard about it, well, it was the last straw for some of them. Gospel writers tell us the other 10 became indignant with James and John. They became indignant with James and John. Can you imagine it? Church people becoming indignant with other church people. Peter was mad, probably because he hadn't thought to ask first. Remember just a few verses earlier in this chapter when that rich young ruler went away sad, that Peter reminded Jesus that they had left everything to follow him. And the implied question behind his proclamation was, so what's in it for us? Peter wasn't getting it. And the other 9 disciples, they were simmering at the audacity of the sons of thunder. You know, people can only take favoritism so long that doesn't include them. The remaining disciples were also mad with James and John, in fact, that Jesus had to set them down to set them straight. He told them that, look, even if the Gentile rulers like the Lord over their subjects, even if the way of the world is to get power over people and use it, that it should not be so for you. Rather, Jesus said, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom, a lutron. That's an uncommon word in the New Testament. It referred to buying the freedom of a slave or a prisoner by paying some huge sacrificial price. That's what Jesus did, of course. And somehow, I think those words must have stilled even the boasting tongues and unbridled ambitions of James and John. Perhaps it was even at that moment that John, the son of thunder, began to be transformed into John, the beloved disciple, the apostle of love. Maybe it was at that moment that John began to sort of understand that in the coming days he would not be seated at the right or the left hand of Jesus. He would be standing at the foot of the cross with his mother. See what Jesus told them, as he says to us today, is that the path to greatness in life always lies in servanthood. The avenue to real glory is the back alley of serving other people. How many folks don't seem to get that? Even in the church, how many have turned around what Jesus said? So they come here every week, seeking not to serve, but to be served. To have their way, not his way. To subjugate others, rather than to submit to them. How many folks scurry from church to church, from fellowship to fellowship, from congregation to congregation, looking not to be a blessing to somebody else, as we've been talking about this year, but to get blessed, not to feed others, but to be fed, not to minister to others, but to be ministered to. Sometimes I have to tell you, I am astounded at the selfishness of some of the saints. For they somehow seem to really believe that in the end, it's all about them. But I want to tell you, sisters and brothers, if you really want to follow Jesus, the line still forms at the rear. It's not always easy, seldom convenient. Sometimes it's a downright hassle. That's the way Jesus left it. It's the only way that we can be successful in God's eyes, even when we're not acknowledged by it by anybody else. It will take a certain degree of humility, to be sure. Michael Caine tells how as a young, unknown actor, he once went to the last resort of starving actors, a casting agency run by a man named Curtis, Ronnie Curtis. As Caine tells us, Curtis was very cross-eyed, so he came out and he pointed at a group and said, "You," and no one knew who he meant. 3 of them stood up. And Curtis said, what size is your chest? And thinking he was talking to them, they all blurted out. And then Curtis said, "Who said 40? And Caine put his hand up. Curtis said, "What's your inside leg measurement?" And he said 32. He said, "Come with me." When Caine got into the office, the agent explained to him he would be playing a policeman in a small film on the following day. But the sole reason why Michael Caine got that part in the film was that he fit the uniform the film company already had in their wardrobe. Humility is a gift sometimes, isn't it? Or I think of a little graveyard beside a church in a small village where the memory of a devoted soul who had spent herself in the service of other people in that community was enshrined in a very touching epitaph. It said simply, "She has done what she couldn't." That's how it may be at times. We may be pushed beyond what we think we can do. We may be called upon to put up with things we don't want to put up with. We may be treated as though we're Cinderella and all the rest of our ugly stepsisters are headed off to the ball and we're not going. May I tell you, in the end, it's worth it. It's worth every ounce of sacrifice, every dollar of expense, every hour of service, everything and anything that it would cost you. Why? Because serving others will put you in the company and the presence of Jesus Christ. Even when he stretches us. That is true happiness, true greatness lies It was St. Lawrence who said he found Jesus as much in the pots and pans of a busy kitchen washing up than he found in the chapel and in the prayers. Some years ago, Special Olympics were held in Seattle, and there were 9 contestants, all of them physically or mentally challenged. They assembled at the starting line for the 100-yard dash. At the gun, they started out not really in a dash, but with certainly a relish to run this race and to finish and win. All of that is except for one little boy who stumbled immediately on the asphalt. He tumbled over a few times, and then he began just to cry. The other 8 runners heard the boy. They slowed down and they looked back. And then they all turned around and they all went back, all 8 of them. One girl with Down syndrome bent down and she kissed him and she said, "This will make it better." Then all 9 of them leaned to their arms and they walked together to the finish line. Everybody in the stadium stood, and the cheering went on for a long time. And the people who were there said they would never forget it. And why is that? Because deep down, we know this one thing, don't we? What matters in life is more than winning for ourselves. What matters in life is helping other people win, even if it means slowing down and changing our course. So I ask you this morning, are you willing to put yourself forward in the service of Christ by serving other people in His name? It may mean going home and finding stuff in your closet and bringing it back up to that truck outside. It may mean buying a ticket to the Empty Bowls event so you can help feed the hungry in this community. It may mean going across the street on a Saturday morning and helping with our Dream League, special challenged kids playing baseball. It may mean working in the food pantry. It may mean doing any number of jobs. You see, if you've already settled the question of who is the master of your life, if you already know that God is the one who actually owns all the resources of the world, we just have them in trust, holding them. If you've already made a personal commitment to follow Jesus, then this is where that commitment takes you. Which means that as of today, if you haven't realized it or not, your task and my task is to be a transforming agent in the world around us. I don't have to tell you, we are living in a supremely self-absorbed society in which few people are willing to be servants to others. Yesterday morning, Julie and I were in the drive-thru lane at McDonald's when a near riot broke out between the 2 drivers and the 2 cars behind us. It's one of those drive-through places where there are 2 ordering lines, but they merge into one. Bad idea. And the 2 guys behind us both thought they should go first. One of them pulled up quickly. The other one pulled up right beside him. The other one pulled to within a centimeter of the other car. Then the other one began banging his fist on the hood of the other car. They began yelling at each other, screaming. It was near Armageddon over an Egg McMuffin. So I did the only thing I could do. When I got to the cashier, I said, I want to buy the breakfast of those 2 guys behind me because they're obviously having a bad day. He said, okay. I paid for their breakfast and for ours. I went on my way. I never saw them. But you see, if we don't do things like that, if we don't interject ourselves into the chaos that's all around us, if we don't bring some note of civility and kindness into a very uncivil world, who will? Who will? There will always be plenty of room at the servant's entrance to the world's great venues. And if you're looking for Jesus, that's where you're going to find him this morning. The Sons of Thunder thought it was a simple request, an easy question. They thought Jesus should have been more than happy to honor their desires. After all, they were his favorites. Listen again to what he told them. Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. Don't you just suppose Jesus may be saying the exact same thing to you and me this morning? Amen.